Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about MBOM behind the scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created MBOM. MBOM helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where MBOM Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy MBOM and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBOM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBOM podcast. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by OfferingTree. OfferingTree is your one-stop shop for all things website, appointments, scheduling, booking, email newsletter, memberships, online products, and more. Stay tuned to hear more about OfferingTree as well as get a special discount code later in the episode. Today on the podcast, I am super excited to be joined by Brandon Dawson-Jarvis. Brandon is a Montreal-based social entrepreneur and yoga instructor. Like many yoga practitioners, he has found yoga to be super transformative in his life. He is the owner of Grove Campus, an impact-focused company that sells eco-friendly cork yoga mats and offers donation-based yoga classes to fund community initiatives that they organize and execute themselves. Grove Campus's efforts have resulted in helping families in need with school supplies and Christmas presents, among other initiatives. Brandon is super passionate about building stronger communities and helping individuals feel better through yoga and meditation. And Brandon has one of the most touching yoga stories I've ever heard. He had me almost to tears talking about his journey going to prison, coming out, finding yoga, becoming a yoga teacher, and creating a business that allows other people to benefit from yoga as well as supports communities. So this episode was very impactful and moving for me, and I hope that it is for you as well. And as always, I hope that you learn a little bit along the way in a different way that you might be able to make a social impact and run a successful business. So without further ado, here is Brandon. Welcome to the podcast today, Brandon. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you.
I think this is going to be such a fun conversation. I can't wait to see everything that we chat about and just where this goes. And first question for you is just, where are you joining me from today?
I am joining from Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
Amazing. Opposite side of where I'm from. So I'm sure it's chilly there right now, but you look like you're dressed warm.
Yeah, I got a toque and sweater and sweatpants. So nice and layered, comfy.
I love it. And so to kick this thing off, can you tell me a little bit about your yoga journey and just how you got into yoga?
Yeah, definitely. So I like to start off conversations by letting people know that I'm pretty much an open book. So any kind of questions that you have, I really invite people not to shy away, and I want to kind of remove stigma around a lot of issues that I think carry a lot of stigma. So to hop right into things, I went to prison. I was sentenced to 3.5 years. And the way that the prison system works out is that you do about 2/3 of your sentence inside, and then your last third is kind of like reintegrating into the community and like back into society. And so I was not very aware of my mental health state or mental health issues per se when I went in. But now reflecting, looking back, there was definitely a lot of emotional turmoil, like mental anguish that I was carrying with me throughout, like from the earlier years in life, and really did not know how to maneuver or get rid of it. And so the reality that I was creating for myself was super toxic, and so landed in prison. And while I was there, I knew that I was not well mentally. I knew that much. I guess, like I said before, just the things I experienced in my home growing up and in the neighborhood that I grew up in, um, it was very difficult. And so when I was in prison, I asked to speak to a psychologist. And I had a first meeting with a psychologist, and I explained everything that happened in early life. And by the time the meeting ended, she asked me if I was suicidal, and I said no. And then she said, okay, well, unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to continue seeing you on a regular basis. We are pretty much tied up with all the guys who are suicidal. And I said, okay, well, I guess that's the end of that. Like, there's not much that I can do at that point. So I go through my sentence, and I'm seeing really like traumatic things, like people overdosing, people fighting, and like really violent fights, like with weapons. And, then you have the fact that you're like locked in a cell, like psychologically, like there's nothing you can do to like open this door. And, you just have like these thoughts that run through your mind, like if there's an earthquake or if there's like some kind of natural disaster, like there's no escape in this cell. And it's really hard, especially if you don't have the tools to kind of like ground yourself. So all this is happening, and I finally finish my sentence, or the 2/3 bit, and I get released back into society, but in an even worse state than when I had went in. Now there's really no moment of like peace, like whether I'm awake or asleep. Like when I'm sleeping, I'm having nightmares. I have PTSD, like just all the things that I like saw and like experienced really started to like take hold. And so I asked my parole officer, since I'm on parole for the next year and 2 months, I asked my parole officer, I'll say, hey, miss, this happened in early life, this happened in prison. Like, can I speak to someone? I think I need a therapist. I need a psychologist. Like, I need help. And then she tells me that there's a 6-month waiting period to see somebody. And I say, oh man, like, okay, I'll just try to like cope by myself, I guess. I remember telling myself, like, it will pass. Like, just keep going, keep mustering on. Um, just hope one day it will like go away on its own type thing. And so 7 months into reintegration now, things start to kind of slowly pick up. I land a job after about months and months of being told no because of my record. Finally land a job. I finally get my ID sorted out because all my ID had been expired. So that was a challenge getting new ID. And everything, I'm reconnecting with friends, with family. There was a lot of stigma. Like I said, when I came out, I was very like, I didn't want to see people, a lot of shame and guilt that was there. So I kind of was hiding out. And so I slowly start to get out and about, and then I'm on my way to a basketball game. I used to play basketball at the time. I was on my way to a basketball game, and I got into a fender bender. Somebody had rear-ended me, and so I get out the car to check for damages. And this person, excuse me, this person got out the car and just started yelling, just started screaming, I guess, super road rage. And at this point, I'm super like easily triggered. I have like this rage running through my body, just with everything that's going on. And so I start yelling back. We pull off to the side of a road and we start pushing and shoving. Police are called, but because I'm on parole, my margin of error is like next to nothing. Like I cannot do anything wrong or else I get sent back, which is exactly what happened. And so they charge me with assault and then they send me back to prison. And at this point, I'm like super distraught. I was having to tell my mom, my partner, my family, everybody who was like kind of riding with me through that first stay in prison. I had to tell them like 7 months later that I got sent back for like not next to nothing. Like there was not even any damage to the cars. And so I basically like, I guess, hit my rock bottom at this point. And when you're in prison, like if you have a TV, that's like it's gold because it takes your mind out of prison. Basically, if you can be watching something that you would normally watch while you were, I guess, outside in like your everyday life, if you have a show that you kind of watch, it makes it seem like you're not wasting time because this is what you would normally be doing no matter where you were. So somebody had offered me a TV while I went back for my second time. And I did not turn it on for the first few weeks. I did not turn it on. What I did instead was really try to figure out. I kind of had like this moment where like it just reality didn't seem like real. I just couldn't. First of all, I didn't want to accept the fact that this was like my fate because my father, who I passed on a lot of judgment onto, um, went in and out of the jail system throughout his entire life, and I judged him very heavily as I was growing up, and I said that I would never be like him, um, really not really understanding why this person went back and forth, just from what I saw and just past judgment. And now I'm finding myself in the same situation. And so, first of all, that was super humbling, but trust me, a dose of medicine that I did not want to take, but I guess I needed at that time. And so, what I decided to do, instead of kind of distract myself and just kind of like enter into like prison politics or whatever, is grab a pen and paper and write down my entire life. So I guess it's like now that I'm in this kind of yoga world, I would kind of compare to a Vipassana meditation retreat because for the first time I actually wanted to be in prison. I know that sounds weird, but I told myself like there's no point leaving this institution if you're just going to continue down this path. Like we need to figure out what's going on. Like what's wrong? Like how did you end up back here after you said that you were never going to come back? So I wrote out everything from like my first memory up until the fender bender, and everything started coming up. Everything that I had buried throughout my entire life really started surfacing. My nightmares were really like vivid at this point. And by the time I get to the fender bender, I just have this little voice that I heard in my head say like, it's your fault. Like it's your fault that you're back. And then I said, well, okay, well, if that's true, then like, what about everything else in life? And it was like, yeah, that's your fault as well. And what I had done before that was just blame everybody else, blame my father, blame my mother, blame society, blame the education system, just place a bunch of blame and never really took responsibility. And for the first time, I started taking responsibility. And that was when I first turned on the TV because the emotional release, that like discharge that I felt, I had to like, yeah, like it was so painful that like a yell slash cry like was released at that point. And I don't know if I would have been able to release that if I didn't have the TV, because I'm pretty sure even with the TV, the whole kind of range still heard me kind of like yell out. And I got out for the second time and went into like a deep depression, because on loop in my mind was just a constant playback of like how I ruined my life, how I'll never be happy, how I hurt so many people, how I hurt myself, how I put my life at risk. And so about a year of this is happening. I'm having trouble getting out of bed, just really super depressed. My partner comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, I think you should try yoga." And I thought it was the most ridiculous suggestion that I've ever heard, because I don't identify, or at least I didn't at that point identify with your traditional Western yoga class. And I had been asking for quote unquote professional help. Like I've been asking for psychologists, therapists. And I was like, yoga, that just seems so ridiculous. But again, I heard that little voice say, like, let's invite some humility again and let's try it. Like you can't knock it until you try it. And I was getting free yoga at work through like a gym membership. So I was like, there's really nothing to lose. So I set out to do yoga that week, and I was like, okay, let me give this thing a fair chance. I'll do a week of yoga and let's see what happens. Monday, nothing happened. Tuesday, now the teacher's like, okay, let's set an intention for our class. And I didn't know what an intention was. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what's an intention? She's like, an intention could be like wanting to become a better version of yourself, wanting peace, more joy, or living in present moment. And I said, oh my God, like you're talking to my soul. Like, how do I get this? And we start going through the flow, upward dog, downward dog, warrior one, warrior two. And I start sweating and just complaining in my mind. I'm like, why am I so hot? I thought we were just going to stretch. And there was this older lady in the corner and she just looked so peaceful. And I was like, why does she look like so graceful and peaceful? And I'm like just sweating buckets and having so much trouble just doing these simple movements. And I caught myself complaining about the weather. Like in Montreal, it was November time and it's super cold. And I'm like, oh, I have to go back outside. And then I caught myself complaining about having to cook dinner and walking my dog. And then she says, okay, we're going to take a child's pose. And then I'm going to invite you to come back to your intention. And that's when everything changed. I realized that I was miserable in my mind. That was exactly what was making me sick and keeping me like down in the dumps. And I needed to change. So after class, I didn't even go back to work that afternoon. I ran home. I started meditating, and no prior experience or knowledge or anything. I was just like, go in your mind and take out everything that's not serving you, that's not true, or whatever, like your truth, or I don't really know how to explain it, but like everything that we can kind of shift. And so the fact, I'll give you a clear example, the fact that I ruined my life because I went to prison, not true, absolutely not true. But I kept telling myself that, and it was taking a physical and mental toll on me. So I got rid of that. And just a bunch of thoughts that I had throughout life, maybe some thoughts that were passed on to me from society or whatever the case is, everything that I did not want to hold as my truth, I just got rid of and kind of changed and adopted new truths, and then continued on with yoga, and yeah, so that's how I got into it.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. Truly. Thank you for sharing all of that, Brandon. And your story, like the words that come to mind to me are both, heartbreaking and so beautiful. And heartbreaking comes to mind because of, as you were talking about, being in prison and then coming out of prison and the way people are treating you. I just find it so heartbreaking that in our society, we treat people who are dealing with things like people who are going to prison are just humans that are dealing with trauma, and they don't know how else to take their feelings and express them to the world, and we treat them like they're not humans anymore, and makes it so hard to, like you said, getting a license and getting your bank accounts probably, and then getting a job. It's like, how are we bettering society by treating people like they're inferior because they've made a mistake? And I just feel like that's a really heartbreaking part of our society. And then your story is so beautiful because, you know, of the way you were able to go within and really take responsibility and take like power over yourself and your life. And it's beautiful too, because it sounds like yoga was an important part of that, but also you did a lot of that even before having these tools of yoga, which I find is like really, really amazing. So I just feel like so inspired from hearing that, and so grateful that you shared all of that so authentically. And I'm curious for you, as you were practicing, what kind of made you want to teach yoga?
So I started sharing. So full disclosure, like when I got out, I had no social media platforms. Um, and after yoga, I decided to get Instagram because technology moves really fast when you're away from society for uh, any amount of time. Any amount of time, like it's the new thing is always like happening. So I went in before Instagram was a thing, and I came out, and all you can hear about is Instagram, Instagram, Instagram. So I was like, okay, let me get on this and just share, share, because I know I can see now how people act is really not, it's just a reflection of like their internal state, and I didn't really grasp that before, but seeing and understanding how I acted and how I felt inside and how they were like correlated, it's that much more obvious for now that I kind of look at other people. And it comes from a place of like empathy and compassion and understanding, like this newfound understanding. So I was like, okay, let me get on Instagram and just share like my aha moments or my revelations that yoga has kind of shed some light on. And the first people to kind of take notice, obviously, is friends and family. And they were like, what happened to you? Like a couple months ago, you were like this super angry, miserable, rageful person that came out of prison. And now like you seem super light and kind of floating around and just loving and caring. And I was like, yoga, like you guys need to try it, get in the studio yesterday and like, yeah, just try it. And they're like, okay, well, we don't identify with your average yoga class, or we don't have the financial means, or whatever the case is. Can you teach us? I was like, whoa, I just started practicing like a couple months ago. I don't really know much. And one friend was like, just teach me what you know. And I was like, okay, cool. We'll go through the same 3 asanas and that will be class. So that happened. I had a couple one-on-ones, and then they kept coming back. My mom kept coming back, a couple friends kept coming back. And I was like, okay, well, let me scale this and get everybody together in a class because it's less time consuming. I don't feel comfortable charging because I'm not certified yet, but I don't want to do it for free. So let's meet halfway and we'll do donation-based classes, but with the money, we'll go out and help the community. So 2 times of years that were pretty difficult for me was Christmas and back to school. And so I started doing Christmas toys, giving those away to underserved families, and buying school supplies and either bringing them to schools or community organizations where we now give school supplies. And yeah, just continued doing that throughout the year and found a couple different initiatives that resonated with me. One of them was funding drug and alcohol rehab for homeless people, and also giving them winter wear. So making sure that they have toques and mittens and underwear and stuff like that for the homeless population. So all of these in some way resonate with me, whether it's children or people with drugs. I never had issues with drugs and alcohol, but a couple of my family members have. And so I see the destruction that that has. And while I was being charged or waiting to go to prison, I was kind of couch surfing. And so homelessness is something that is dear to my heart as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I love how, you started practicing and were immediately able to share these things with other people. And then at what point did you decide to take a teacher training and then I guess like officially start your business, Grove Campus?
So Grove Campus kind of started right away, so to speak. I didn't know what it was. I just know I wanted to do something. And I know that the amount of impact that I can have on my community or on the larger community as an individual would not be as great as, let's say, a brand or a company. And so when I started kind of sharing, the Instagram page that I created was called Grove Campus. It was really inspired by two gentlemen who started their own organization. I think back in the 60s. I don't exactly know what year it was, but two gentlemen, one by the name of Bobby Seale and another one by the name of Huey P. Newton. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they started the Black Panther group, and I'm pretty sure you might have heard of the Black Panther organization in the States. Um, so depending on who you get your history from might kind of paint a picture of what this organization kind of represented and what they did and stuff like that. But through my research and my experience as a person of color, they were really inspiring to me that with the level of impact that they were able to create in their communities with a breakfast club. Like they had a whole system where they would feed kids before they sent them off to school. They had a program where they taught like self-defense and your rights to men of color, or I guess people of color, because there was women in there as well, and just really, really great values and impact that they had in their communities. And so they went to a school that was in Oakland. I believe it was in Oakland, and it was on Grove Street. And I didn't like Grove Street for some reason. And like I said, they went to a school, and schools have campuses. And so I took the street and campus. I married the two and went with Grove Campus.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the backstory behind the name. And I think it's also always really interesting to hear kind of the background of a business and how it gets started and how you were, doing this before you were, I guess, like actually doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You were doing the business before it was formally a business. And
Yeah.
you've mentioned a little bit about Grove Campus and what you do there, but can you talk a little bit more about how you're supporting
Mhm.
communities with the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So just to recap, because the last question you asked me a two-part question, I only was able to answer one.
Mhm.
Um, so as I continued my journey with kind of doing this twofold part with helping or offering accessible yoga to the community and then helping the larger community with resources and stuff like that. Um, a few people came up to me and suggested that I go for my teacher training. And I had looked into it and saw the price that it was. And I didn't have, or I guess I wasn't ready at that point to invest in a teacher training. And then Lululemon heard about what we were doing and approached me, and they had asked me if I was certified, and I said no. And they asked me if I wanted to be certified, and I said it would be a dream come true. And then they said to pick my school and how many hours I wanted to do, and they would take care of the rest. And so that's how I just about 3 years into it, I just received my teacher training October of 2020 of this year, October.
Oh my gosh, congrats.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing. And I love that you were able to get kind of like a quote unquote scholarship opportunity. And I think that,
yes,
we've talked about offline, and maybe we'll chat a bit more about this in this conversation, how, for both of us, the money side and the exchange is an important aspect, but there's also ways that we can empower people and help people in that way. And I think it's really beautiful that you were able to get this gift to be able to do this, because now you're able to share your gifts and your purpose with the world and empower all these communities.
yeah, yeah. So internally grateful for them and their support, and kind of allowing me to continue to do my work and be as effective as possible. So I don't really have to go out there and wing it too much. I have an idea of what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I love it. And now it's time for a short break from the show to talk about our sponsor, OfferingTree. If you're interested in finding an all-in-one platform for online or in-person teaching, then you should definitely check out OfferingTree. OfferingTree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one click, you can build a website, run online or in-person live classes, sell pre-recorded classes, manage memberships and packages, and much more. Communicating with your students is seamless and easy with their automated email system and email marketing tools. Already have your own website? No problem, because OfferingTree can embed seamlessly into your existing website. They're always adding new features to their platform to make it even better. They just recently released the online store feature that lets you easily sell digital content like yoga videos, challenges, and courses right from your website. If you're looking for a single platform to take care of all of your online and in-person teaching needs, then visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. OfferingTree has been supporting MBOM for over a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. OfferingTree is providing special pricing for MBOM listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. That's offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive the discount. All right, now back to the episode. And then in terms of what Grove Campus is doing, can you talk a little bit about how you're supporting communities with the work there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we really want to make yoga accessible, not only financially, but just kind of create a space where everybody feels welcome. So I know there's I've heard people not feel too welcome because they don't identify, like myself as well. But maybe if you're of a certain body type, a certain ethnicity, religion, or whatever the case, whatever man-made structure we have adopted as self to kind of separate ourselves from one another. You know what I mean? Like, let's say, for example, there's a border and you're on the other side. So you consider yourself from this country and I consider myself from that country. And now, for whatever reason, there's a divide between us. Or you make X amount of money a year and I make another amount. And so there's a difference there. Or, whatever difference it is, we want to kind of do away with that and make or create a space where you feel comfortable. And I know I've heard plenty of times you can't be the yoga teacher for everybody, or you can't market to everybody. And I don't think we are. We're just marketing to the people who, or trying to speak to the people, I should say, who have that same or share that same type of philosophy. And they kind of want to look past their body type or their skin complexion or their finances and just do a yoga class, you know what I mean? And then if you're in a position to give something at the end, you do. If not, don't worry about it, because we've all been there where, finances are a little tight. But whatever we have, we try to go out and have an impact in our community. And there's tons of companies or brands that they'll just kind of collect the money and then distribute it or give it away to whatever organization. That's great and all, but we wanted to kind of take it a step further and be the ones to kind of curate these events. And we don't kind of explicitly say to the families or the children, like, we care about you, we want to see you do well, we come from the same kind of circumstances and neighborhoods. But I think it's more like implicit and like subconscious by the fact that we curate these events. Like, we take time and energy to kind of put on, whether it's a toy giveaway or whether it's back to school supplies. Like, we have a whole event where we'll have food and games and stuff like that. And at the end of it, you'll have a bag full of school supplies so that you and your family don't have to stress at what's supposed to be a pretty cool time of year. I loved going back to school, seeing old friends meeting new ones. And it was just like trying to, for parents who are living paycheck to paycheck, like, these unexpected expenses can kind of really dampen the energy in the household. And we kind of want to relieve that. So that's the work, and everything else is just helping us do that work.
Yeah, I think it's really incredible that you've created a business where you're able to run by donation yoga classes. So you're able to, give yoga to people who don't feel like maybe the studio is necessarily for them for whatever reason that is, financial or because it's not a diverse space, and then take that proceeds and help communities in a different way. And I think that this is one of the things that, when we have the conversation around privilege, like, I think that there's just, maybe I'll just speak for myself. Like, I grew up in a privileged family. And so the idea of, parents not being able to afford school supplies is not something that I was familiar with growing up. It's not a concept that I understood. And I think that as a child, you only really know your own life experience. And I think that's when can be a lot of, bullying or teasing or making fun of somebody. You don't understand that kid that doesn't have, the new backpack or the coolest new pencil case or whatever it is, their parents are working so hard just to give them what they did have. And, I think it's hard to bring consciousness to small children in that way because we only have our one lived experience. But I just think about that as something that for myself, it's so important to remember, like, where I came from and that people don't come from the same space as me, and vice versa, and how we can come together to just support each other as humans, as human beings.
Definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, and is that we only know our experience, right? And so it's not to say like, oh, you should know my experience or I should know your experience, but I think it takes a certain level of openness and curiosity to want to share. I could never understand what it is to be a white woman. Like, I can't. And I don't think you can understand how it is to be a Black man. You know what I mean? But I can kind of share my experience with you, how I've been treated in certain situations or how you've been treated in situations. Like, I've never had a fear of walking down any street in any country at any time of night. I don't think that's been the reality for everybody. And so there's a bunch of things where we can go back and forth, but I think ultimately it's to make it so that we can do away with the negative experiences. So I would love to create a world where you can walk down any street at any time of day, night, in any country. That would be great. You know what I mean? And I will definitely try to create that world because I'm aware, I've had people or women come up to me and say like, oh, I've been mistreated in this situation when I went out to this place or whatever the case is. I'm like, man, that's not cool. Let's see what we can do there. And I think it would be really great for people who come from a certain privileged background who've never experienced, skipping meals or opening up the fridge to not see anything. or, stressing during certain times a year, to say like, hey, like, I don't know how that must feel, but I know it must not feel good. So let me see how I can change that or create a world where that suffering is lessened.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's you put that very eloquently. And I think there's something that kind of struck me when everything was happening with Black Lives Matter back in June. I have a very good friend. He was a coworker and a boss a couple of years ago, and he's a Black male. And he was talking about on a podcast episode how, even though he's got a great job, he runs a business, he's educated, you know, one of the things he does when he walks into like a convenience store or a grocery store is he's like, one of the things I don't have as a privilege is saying no to a receipt. And that was something that I had never ever thought about in my entire life, and it was so eye-opening to me. I've thought about it like almost every time I go to a convenience store now, of when I say like no thanks to the receipt or I don't need it, how
Mhm.
this little thing is something that I have as a privilege as a white woman. It's not likely that I'm going to get accused of stealing something when I leave a store. And I think that we have to have these conversations around the things that we're experiencing, because like we were talking about, I'm never going to know your lived experience and you're never going to know mine.
Mhm.
And part of the way that we have these conversations is creating spaces where people feel like it's safe for them to share, because, kind of how we started this conversation, like I'm sure talking about going to prison was really hard and shameful for you for a long, long time, because there's this stigma in society. And there's this stigma around so many things
Mhm.
that we just don't talk about them. And I think the only way to understand somebody else's lived experience is to say like, hey, like I have to say yes to that, because there's like people might think that I stole something even though I've never stolen in my life, type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important kind of piece of the whole conversation around anti-racism and diversity, and bringing equity and equality to all spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So I think, bringing this back into kind of the yoga world, I think that an important conversation that's been happening, through 2020, and I think it's going to continue, or at least I hope it continues. And you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, is creating spaces, yoga communities, yoga studios, that type of thing, that are more inclusive. Because you mentioned like you didn't feel super comfortable or welcome with the idea of a yoga studio. And I hear this from all types of people. Part of their story is not feeling like a yoga studio was for them. And I think that a lot of this is that we see these photos of, I'm going to generalize here, but it's typically white women, often quite thin,
Mhm.
um, often blonde, although not always. There's probably an equal amount of brunettes, usually quite attractive, quite flexible. And they're often doing poses that for the average person are like kind of like the idea of putting your body into a pretzel.
Yeah.
And I think that this idea of like, okay, yoga in the West is for white, skinny women really excludes a lot of people. And I'm not trying to like thin shame anyone out there who's listening. I think
No,
that
right. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
bodies are beautiful. I just think
Yeah.
that that's traditionally been a lot of the marketing that's happening. And I'm curious kind of your thoughts, from your perspective as a person of color, as a male, how do we start making these spaces more diverse? How do we start making them more inclusive?
Yeah, so I agree with you like tenfold, like, and that's why I thought it was such a ridiculous suggestion from my partner when she said I should try yoga, because it the words coming out of my mouth taste very salty when I say it, but I thought yoga was for white women and pregnant women and old people. That's what I said. I was like,
Yeah.
the yoga is for those and not for me. And I think how to make it more exclusive is exactly what Lululemon did, in that they kind of kept their ear out, like in the community, to see like anybody who's kind of coming into the space that looks quote unquote different or doesn't look like quote unquote average. And I think what yoga teachers or studio owners can do is start going into community centers, start going into schools. And even if you are white, go in and share your experience, because I'm sure there's something that you've experienced in your life. It might not be, like you said, the same. It might not be a shared experience, but I'm sure there's something that you've had to overcome. I'm sure there's something that you've had to kind of deal with, struggle with. So go in and share, and then teach the kids how to meditate, breath work, show them the importance of breathing, show them how, like, you can have them sit down and imagine their breath when they're stressed, their breath when they're depressed, their breath when they're feeling happy, their breath when they're feeling grateful, and then have them choose from that point which one to let go of and which one to continue with, And you can show them that there's different, paths to take other than what we see in the media. Because just like how yoga is kind of marketed to or for white women, there's other things that are marketed for people of color. I definitely identify with certain brands, like a car brand or alcohol brand, or certain things that are super marketed to the urban community or inner cities or stuff like that. And there's, I'm sure, no, not I'm sure, I know that there's a bunch of uh, people of color on Instagram that do yoga. So you can share their stories. If we're not in the same city or the same country, you can say, hey, there's this person out in Los Angeles, or this person out in New York, the Running River Collective, that
Mm-hmm.
they do great stuff for their community, and they're a bunch of men of color. And like, that's, for me, that, like, it makes my heart dance and super happy to see that there's men of color that are bringing yoga and meditation and wellness to their communities, because there's so much trauma, there's so much ongoing trauma, um, and what's the word I'm looking for? Intergenerational trauma, um, and all these systemic barriers. And this stuff can really help. This stuff can shed a new light on what's possible, and what we can do once we kind of deal with that trauma.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you speaking to that. And so people can, if they're interested in specifically, like maybe if they're white people looking to help with this cause and to make things more inclusive, getting to know people who are of color, inviting them into yoga spaces, going into communities, offering the yoga practice to people.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, I know this is something that's kind of like a part of your business. I'm curious, how we can bring this into the studio space or into our communities, but thoughts on offering classes more on by donation, or offering more scholarships for people who maybe are marginalized or from communities where they don't have access to yoga. Is that something that you think is helpful in the long run?
Definitely. I'm not going to say no. I think scholarships more so than karma classes or donation based classes. And the reason I say that is because I know that there's certain individuals that will resonate more with certain teachers. And so I'm just going to say, for example, like, if there's a Black man that's on the fence or kind of walks past a studio and wants to go in, but might not identify with the teachers that are giving the classes. But let's say, for example, because I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship, now he sees me at the queue in the class. He might be more willing to try it out. Like, oh, I, whether it's conscious or unconscious, like, oh, he looks like me. I identify with him. I identify with his story. I resonate with it. Let me try out his class. And so I think scholarships, and it also kind of balances out the financial playing field, so to speak, because there might be a lot of people who, and I know there's white people that don't have much money or that don't come from privilege as well. Um, but I think predominantly speaking, it's more people of color. So if you give them certain opportunities and then have them go back into their communities to kind of offer wellness, I think that can definitely move mountains.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think, it kind of seems like in some ways that we can look at it that it shouldn't actually be, that challenging to become more diverse as a yoga collective, I guess, or with studios and communities. It's the idea of maybe it's outside your comfort zone to interact with people who are different than you. And if you're a
Mhm.
business owner, I think getting to know people within your community that look different, that maybe speak different, that have different traditions, if they are teachers or want to be teachers, inviting them into that space. And then they're going to bring their people into that space. And I think ultimately over time, that's how we kind of make this more of something that is available to everyone. And then our marketing naturally becomes more diverse, right? Because then you're doing a photo shoot with your teachers and you've got somebody who, you've got a black man and a black woman and somebody who identifies as LGBTQ plus and somebody who's maybe indigenous. And then it's like, I told you when we chatted last time off the air how I love to travel. And I feel like that's one of the things that I love so much about traveling is being able to interact with people who are different than myself and from a different background. I feel like that's one of the really beautiful things about getting to be alive on this planet right now is to interact with people that aren't the same as you. And I think we can really bring that into the yoga spaces more.
Exactly, exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's what we want and that's what we should be striving for. And that's how we invite those conversations to exchange experiences, is to get people who are different from us into the same space and have these open conversations and kind of do away with like anger and shame and guilt, like you had mentioned the Black Lives Movement. And like on one side, you have a bunch of people who are super angry. And on the other side, you have a bunch of people who are like super shamed and guilt. And like nothing is going to get move forward when people are operating out of those spaces or that energy. And if people can kind of let go a little bit of the anger and people could kind of let go a little bit about the shame and guilt, and we can invite like conversations and understand that like at the end of the day we're all human, you know what I mean? Like do away with like these social constructs. We are all human, and if we are gonna move forward, we have to do it together and kind of do away with all these things that divide us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I feel like that's a good note to start wrapping up on. So I'm curious, Brandon, if you can share where people can go to find you and also if they want to get involved with Grove Campus, contribute to the cause, where can they do that and how can they do that?
So if people want to get involved with Growth Campus, we just released our first product, which is a cork yoga mat. It's eco-friendly, sustainable, super durable. No plastics or harsh chemicals are used. 10% of the profits go towards our initiatives, our community events. Or the alternative would be to directly donate. So 100% of the donations, as well as 100% of the karma-based yoga classes, are allocated towards the fund as well. So we use that. So coming in a couple of weeks, we're going to be buying and wrapping and distributing Christmas toys throughout the holidays. Usually we have everybody come to the local community center to get their toys. But because of COVID, we have to, or not we have to, but we want to drop off the toys to everybody's house. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We have a couple other designs. So right now we only have one design for our mat, but we'll have a couple other designs coming out shortly. And that's our plan. So if anybody was kind of wondering how we're sustainable throughout this whole podcast, if we're kind of giving everything away, excuse me, how we're sustainable is through the sales of our merchandise, so our mats and stuff like that.
Amazing. I'll make sure there's links for all of that in the show notes so people can go check that out. And yeah, once I'm back home in Canada, I need to get my hands on one of those mats because the idea of having a mat that is just totally eco-friendly, doesn't have chemicals or plastics in it is pretty incredible. So I'm stoked to give that a try. And I'm just really grateful for this conversation. This has been a really, really empowering conversation. And I know that everyone who's listening is going to love it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your platform with me and kind of amplifying my voice, Growth Campus's voice, and what we're trying to accomplish in the world. So internally grateful for you, Amanda. Thank you so much.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. Please make sure you go and check out Grove Campus and everything that Brandon is up to. As always, you can find show notes over on the website at mbomyoga.com. I talked about this last week, but we got a little bit of a refresh on the website, so I would love for you to go check it out. As well, there is a special episode out on MBOM behind the scenes with Brandon, and we really dove into the business lessons that he's learned through creating his business. So if you'd like to check out that, you can head on over to patreon.com/MBOM yoga and get access to that episode, as well as every other episode that is in the library. There are more than 15 episodes there now. So I hope that you enjoy the collection of episodes as it continues to grow. And of course, a huge thank you and shout out to the sponsor of this episode, OfferingTree. Make sure you go check them out at offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.